Coming to paperback and e-readers, Isis Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Pre-order your copy of Isis Dark Incubus at Amazon.com and other online booksellers everywhere. Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Illuminati. The man who rules the world takes on the head of the global elite in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes' Illuminati on Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. New York Mayor Eric Adams wanted to blame his recent political woes on race at a recent town hall meeting.
Is there more to do? You're darn right there is. But this committed team is getting it done. Look at this team, folks. Look at this team. Look at my deputy mayors. First Deputy Mayor Sheena Wright. Deputy Mayor, stand up. They need to see you. Deputy Mayor Williams Ison. Deputy Mayor Mira Josie. Deputy Mayor Amazon. Deputy Mayor Maria Torres Springer. Have you ever seen this much chocolate leading the city of New York? And then go down the line. Look who's here. This is representative of the city. That's why people are hating on me. You trying to figure out why they're hating on me? They're hating on me because how many of you go to church? Man, this is a Matthew 21 and 12 moment. Jesus walked in the temple. He saw them doing wrong in the temple. He did what? He turned the table over. I went to City Hall to turn the table over. First woman police commissioner of color. First Spanish-speaking police commissioner. First Spanish-speaking correction commissioner. Go through the line of what we're doing. In 2 years. That's right. Because that's how we do it when you're from Brownsville. And so I know that many of you may stand around and say, well, you know what, Eric, we don't like this, we don't like that. I got it. That's the same thing they did to David Dinkins. It took us 30 years after what they did to David Dinkins. And who did we get after David Dinkins? Giuliani. It was a setup for a setback. That's what it was. And you know what happened with David Dinkins? They wore him down so much that black folks didn't come out to vote. They said, you know what, we're not coming out. They just beat him and wore him down over and over and over again. David Dinkins was the one that passed the legislation for safe cities, safe streets that allowed us to get the resources we needed to bring down crime in our city. And who benefited from it? Giuliani. So here we are, in the place of my birth. People can say what they want, but you have a mayor from Brownsville. Never ran and never will.
Now, at a town hall meeting in Brooklyn, New York Mayor Eric Adams wanted to blame most of his political woes on race and wanted to say that the reason why his administration is under such criticism is primarily because it's made up of people of color. And as Eric Adams continued to make his whole argument as related to why he's being persecuted, he tried to compare himself to Jesus, taking a scripture from the Bible to say that he was looking to make change similar to what Jesus wanted to do in the church when he overturned all of the tables as related to the money changers who were looking to sell items in the church. He had said that he had turned his house into a den of thieves, and also then went on to compare himself to former New York Mayor David Dinkins, who wound up losing the election in 1993 to Rudy Giuliani, according to Eric Adams, because of apathy from black New Yorkers. Now, these three talking points are just complete bullshit, and they are complete bullshit because the only person that is responsible for the failure of Eric Adams' whole administration and the reason why it's receiving so much criticism stares Eric Adams in the mirror, and that is New York Mayor Eric Adams. Now, New York Mayor Eric Adams, or as I call him, the cream of wheat man, started to wind up alienating most of the voting bloc even before he became mayor, when he started playing coy with his policies as related to the vaccine mandate that Bill de Blasio had implemented just before he took office. And instead of Eric Adams taking a leadership role, he looked to continue following behind former Mayor Bill de Blasio and Andrew Cuomo in maintaining many of their policies that most New Yorkers were upset about. And when he started to do this, he basically started alienating large voting blocks, and that really started with the black vote when he decided to maintain the vaccine mandate that prevented most New Yorkers from being able to work a job. Now, this mandate basically took 1 million New Yorkers, primarily foundational black Americans, and prevented them from being able to work in New York City for 11 months. And as New Yorkers were struggling to be able to make their way here in New York City, primarily foundational black Americans, Eric Adams basically expressed his contempt for most of those foundational black Americans, insisting that they take a shot that the U.S. Supreme Court told them that they did not have to take in order to work. Moreover, you had countries all over the world that got rid of these mandates, but Eric Adams maintained these mandates in place and further went on to continue to mock Brooklyn Nets player Kyrie Irving as he looked to stand on his right that was given to him by the U.S. Constitution and the U.S. Supreme Court to not take this shot. Eric Adams continued to mock Kyrie Irving, and as he mocked Kyrie Irving and looked to clout chase from all of these whites and non-blacks, he couldn't see how he basically was creating a rift for himself with most of the foundational black Americans who lived in New York City, and was starting to alienate those black New Yorkers who did not want to take this shot. Moreover, he also alienated a lot of people who worked in city jobs. Again, a lot of foundational black Americans, whites, and people of color, and alienated all of those people, thinking, oh, he could take people for granted, not seeing the damage he was doing to himself long term, because he thought he was getting in with all of these people in higher up positions, and as he thought he was getting in with those people in higher up positions like Kathy Hochul and Joe Biden, he thought that he was going to be able to gain some favor with them and hopefully be appointed for some sort of position in the Biden administration if Joe Biden ran for office in 2024 or a position opened. However, what happened with Eric Adams is as he continued to maintain this jab mandate, basically disrespecting most of the foundational black Americans, he wound up alienating a good chunk of that black voting bloc, not seeing the long-term damage that he was doing. Now, Eric Adams wants to go out here and talk about how he has this whole cabinet of people of color, a cabinet primarily made up of women of color, but not any heterosexual black men in any sort of serious leadership position. And that is by design, because what Eric Adams wanted to do was go out here and hire a group of women who would be submissive and agreeable to him, but he hasn't really gone out of his way to do anything for black people. And the critical question I would ask Eric Adams is, even though you've got this so-called cabinet of color, what have they done specifically for foundational black Americans? That's the critical question I have to ask Eric Adams, because he's thinking, oh, because he's got a predominantly minority cabinet, that people are supposed to see that as some sort of accomplishment. But what good is a cabinet of color if that cabinet is not doing anything for black people? Because if that cabinet of color is not doing anything for black people, then they are nothing more than a group of bootlicks just basically sitting in a job waiting for another job, and they're not doing anything for anyone. So when he sits there and talks about, oh, I've got this black cabinet, big deal. There are a lot of educated black bootlicks out there, but if they're not providing anything tangible for black people, then they have absolutely no value to any black man or black woman on the street. And that's what Eric Adams really just doesn't seem to understand. Nobody cares about the race of these individuals if they're not doing anything tangible for black people. If they're not bringing anything tangible to black people, then those people who are a part of that cabinet are just absolutely useless overall, just like he is. Now, New York Mayor Eric Adams further goes on to try to compare himself to Jesus, and this is the absolute most bullshit statement I have ever heard in my life, because no one can compare themselves to the Messiah, the Son of God, and the persecution he went through, because the Messiah basically went through that persecution mainly because he wanted to pay the sin debt in full of all humanity. And this just shows how arrogant Eric Adams is and how full of himself he is, because he is no martyr at all like Jesus, who came down to earth with an altruistic reason, again, just to redeem the souls of all mankind. But Eric Adams had a real reason for running for office, and again, he's not looking to make change like Christ did. No, what he wants to do is maintain the status quo. And that was shown to us by him siding with Bill de Blasio and Kathy Hochul as related to maintaining their policies, and it was also shown to us as related to his deals that he made with the Turkish consulate. I mean, he's talking about how he's looking to make change like Jesus, and that's a complete lie, because if you were looking to make change like Jesus, why are you making deals with the Turkish consulate, and why is the FBI investigating? Again, another critical question I have to ask, because when I look at Eric Adams, he doesn't look like somebody who's following Christ or looking to present an example of Christ. No, what he's looking to me is like the Pharisees and the Sadducees who persecuted Christ, and now that he's basically being persecuted by those Pharisees and Sadducees that he's a part of, he's basically looking more and more like Pontius Pilate, more than Jesus Christ. So his whole argument about being persecuted like Jesus is just complete nonsense, and it's complete nonsense because he's not being persecuted at all. No, he's basically being held accountable for his actions, and he's being held accountable for his actions because it was his decision to again start out on a bad foot by following behind Bill de Blasio and all of the members of the Blue Party, hoping that his bootlicking would make him a Biden of Brooklyn, until Joe Biden showed how little regard he had for him during the migrant crisis. Now, this entire migrant crisis is all Eric Adams' fault, and it's all Eric Adams' fault because he was the one out here looking to virtue signal, trying to show how he was going to toe the party line and follow their ideals as related to showing how they were not going to be like that big racist Donald Trump, who comes from New York as well. And what they want to do is Eric Adams wants to do is go out and say, oh, I'm not like Donald Trump. I'm going to open up my sanctuary city. I'm going to follow the lead of Bill de Blasio and follow the lead of Bill de Blasio by maintaining the sanctuary city in order to go out here and create a covert contract with Joe Biden to show that the policy of sanctuary cities are something that can work when any critical thinking individual who runs any sort of business would know that this whole plan to bring a bunch of people who entered the country illegally into a city and try to take care of them would not be feasible, and it wouldn't have been feasible as related to New York City because New York City was running a budget deficit. And Eric Adams, knowing New York City was running a budget deficit even before the migrants came, still invited the migrants to come in because social currency had more value to him than making sure New York City was fiscally sound. Because what Eric Adams wanted to do was go out here and clout chase, hoping that Joe Biden would notice him, similar to what George Jefferson did on The Jeffersons. And on that sitcom, George Jefferson wanted to try to impress Mr. Whitendale, and that's what Eric Adams wanted to do. He thought he could shuck and jive his way into impressing Joe Biden and hope that Joe Biden would notice him and see the so-called great job he would do with these migrants and integrating them into the city. And then found out that all of these migrants, which were not just a couple of hundred people, but millions of people, and all he got was just 30,000 of those migrants, and they basically overran New York City's homeless service system, and that was basically led to Eric Adams having to take the first taste of humble pie as related to his jive and his pride. And that's where he started to turn on his idol, Joe Biden, and started demanding services for taking care of these migrants. And as he started to go out and started to make demands for Joe Biden to take care of these migrants, he found out that the covert contract he created wasn't fulfilled, and many New Yorkers started to see a complete decline in the quality of life here in New York, because most of these New Yorkers who were going to work in places like on Madison Avenue, where the hotel, I forget its name, the hotel down there basically is a prominent piece of New York real estate. And this prominent piece of New York real estate, the Roosevelt Hotel, this hotel is in the heart of Manhattan, and the heart of Manhattan has been turned into a squalid place that is on the level of 1970s, 1980s 8th Avenue, with all the XXX porn and the prostitutes, because of all of the migrants basically creating all of that squalor. And all of this is due to Eric Adams basically rolling out a red carpet for these migrants, and he is shown on video meeting these migrants on the bus. And as he's been shown on video meeting the migrants on the bus, shaking their hands, he wants to go out here and say that it's race. No, it's not race at all, as related to this whole situation with Eric Adams and why he's getting cooked and roasted. No, Eric Adams is primarily getting cooked and roasted because of all of his own bad decisions, and his bad decisions basically show why he deserves the 28% approval rating he currently is receiving, because he has basically destroyed the quality of life here in New York City. And as he has destroyed the quality of life here in New York City, he is the one who needs to be held accountable for all of his incompetence and all of his failures. And all of his failures are all due to the fact that he wants to follow and not lead. And what he wants to do now is go out here and try to make it like, oh, it's race that's the reason. No, it has nothing to do with race. It has to do with a black bootlick basically being shown as the incompetent person he is. And this black bootlick finding out that he's not going to be able to find a way to jive his way out of this entire situation. Now, Eric Adams finally wants to go out here and say, oh, this whole situation is him being just like David Dinkins, and he is just like David Dinkins. I'll agree with him on one part of that aspect, in that just like David Dinkins, he was completely disconnected and detached from the needs of New Yorkers, and like David Dinkins, he refused to listen to New Yorkers until something bad happened as related to his reputation. Now, back in the 90s, David Dinkins, when he was the mayor of New York and our first black mayor, he basically allowed crime to run rampant all throughout New York City, and allowed crime to run rampant because it was primarily being done to black and, in some cases, non-black people. And as the city went out of control with the close to 2,200 murders, David Dinkins basically sat on his hands until they decided to murder a white man, Brian Watkins. And when the white man wound up dead, that's when David Dinkins wanted to go out here and start talking about safe streets and safe city. Unfortunately, that policy came too little too late. And once that policy came too little too late, David Dinkins, basically his reputation was damaged, and that's what Eric Adams sadly didn't learn. His reputation is damaged just like David Dinkins, and it's damaged basically because of his own incompetence. No, David Dinkins was too busy being detached and disconnected as related to the issues of New York and all of the problems created by Ed Koch, Abe Beame, and other mayors, and he wasn't really focused on looking to connect with New Yorkers to show them that he cared about dealing with the crime that was out of control at the time, and he really didn't have a solid plan until that white man, Brian Watkins, that tourist from, I believe, Idaho or one of those Midwestern states wound up passing away. Then he wanted to do something, and Eric Adams is in the same place in that he basically now wants to go out here and do something, but sadly what he wants to do is play the race card and say, oh, they're after me because I'm black. No, they're not after you because you are black. No, they're after you because you are incompetent. And because of your incompetence, the quality of life in New York, which was already at a low because of Bill de Blasio's just complete incompetence all around, things have gotten progressively worse. And they've gotten progressively worse because Eric Adams willfully and intentionally doubled the homeless population here in New York by accepting all of these migrants who have brought the quality of life here in New York back down to the dark days of the late 80s and early 90s, like the crack epidemic, when it was around and criminals and drug dealers were basically running rampant. And what's really sad about this whole situation is that Eric Adams basically invited these individuals, and as he invited these individuals, these migrants, here to New York City, he has created a fiscal budget crisis, he has created a crime crisis, and he has allowed individuals to come into the city that have no respect or no regard for our authority. And as these individuals have gained power, they have become ghost gangs that basically, in some cases, I believe, feel that they have no respect for our laws, and that's why they're assaulting police officers, because they have already learned, since they don't have to go out here and respect the authority of ICE, Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement, they don't have to respect the authority of the NYPD, and because of this, they believe they have a right to do whatever they please, and that's why Eric Adams is being seen as the guy who basically screwed everything up, because he was the one who was in charge, and instead of him looking to lead New York City out of the whole incompetent situation that Bill de Blasio created, what the cream of wheat man did was want to cook up a scheme, hoping that he would create a covert contract with the Biden administration, that they would see how great he was taking care of all of these migrants and eventually appoint him to some sort of position in the 2025 Biden administration. Unfortunately, what has happened to Eric Adams is that the Biden administration has ignored him, and as they've ignored him, he's basically out here and now he's dealing with the blowback from all of the bad decisions that he made. And all the bad decisions he made have made New York City a place nobody wants to come to. And now Eric Adams, who is 1 year away from re-election, knows that with his record, he can't run on that record. And what he wants to do is now play the race card, saying, oh, that this made black people apathetic to David Dinkins. No, I was there, a registered voter in 1993, and I know what happened to David Dinkins. Black people didn't get apathetic because of all of the things said about David Dinkins. They got apathetic about David Dinkins doing nothing for them in the 3 years before Brian Watkins was murdered, and they got apathetic because David Dinkins did absolutely nothing for black people, and that was even with black people on his cabinet as part of his office, because one of the women in his office was caught in a corruption scandal where she had bought this pink leather sofa. So David Dinkins basically went out because he did nothing for black people tangible in improving the quality of life for black people. And he didn't get a second term because he basically allowed the city to run in ruin, because as long as there was only black people dying as part of that 2,200 murders, that was all that he didn't really care about any of those people. No, the spellbound mayor wanted to fit into the black box that's acceptable to white people and only wanted to do something about crime when a white man died. And that's what led to the fall of David Dinkins. He didn't do anything tangible for black people, so black people had no reason to vote for David Dinkins, just like most black people have no reason to vote for Eric Adams, who cost black people a year of their salary with his vaccine mandate and continuing to keep that policy in place. And most black people also don't have a reason to vote for Eric Adams because he's going out here giving migrants a red carpet. Meanwhile, black homeless people and black veterans, they can't get any sort of service. I mean, you've got Eric Adams who can find $1,000 to put on a debit card for migrants who entered the country illegally, but Jordan Neely, he gets choked out by Daniel Penny and doesn't get a dime, and this man was basically on a train begging for something to eat, but Eric Adams couldn't find Jordan Neely a debit card to give him when he was alive, and had he given Jordan Neely a debit card, maybe Jordan Neely would be alive today. And many of those homeless veterans and homeless New Yorkers, 100,000 of them, he didn't have a care about any of those people, mainly because they were black. But he wants to go and say, oh, they're persecuting me because of race. Well, what have you done for foundational black Americans? Critical question, because it was mostly black people who came out and voted for Eric Adams. And instead of Eric Adams giving those black people tangibles, he gave them the finger on New Year's Eve by keeping Bill de Blasio's mandate in place that kept black people out of work for close to a year. And he basically now is reaping what he sowed, later than what he sowed, greater than what he sowed, and this bitter harvest is coming on him because he did not show love to people in the beginning. No, all he wanted to do was get white validation and approval, and now that he's gotten his contempt shown to him by all of those white people he was bootlicking for, like Andrew Cuomo, Kathy Hochul, Bill de Blasio, and Joe Biden. Now he wants to play the race card and say, oh, black people, come vote for me. No, black people, what we need to do is stay home. Since this man doesn't want to give us tangibles, then we don't need to give him a vote. Let him get his vote from all of those migrants we wanted to go shake hands with. Let him go get his votes from those migrants who rolled out a red carpet for. Let him go out here and get his votes from those migrants, and let us wait and see, the way he said Jordan Neely, as related to his case with Daniel Penny, we needed to wait and see. No, let us wait and see as he finds somebody to vote for him now that he's alienated everyone, because if he couldn't bring us tangibles, then we've got no reason to feel sorry for Eric Adams. No, what he's reaping is what he sowed, and what he's reaping is a bootlick reward. And since the Biden of Brooklyn is so in love with Biden, he can go and get the same results as Joe Biden right now with a low approval rating. And that low approval rating is due to his own incompetence. And it doesn't matter if he has a so-called cabinet of color, they did nothing for black people. And since they did nothing for black people, I don't feel any sympathy for Eric Adams. Now, if you want to pick up some of my positive black fiction on the SJS Direct imprint, you can find many of the books on the SJS Direct imprint on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. And if you want to see me make more videos taking the Cream of Wheat Man to the barbecue, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Illuminati. The man who rules the world takes on the head of the global elite in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes, Illuminati on Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Godbreaker. The man who rules the world takes on the Asgardian god of thunder in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes, Godbreaker in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.